Welcome to the Deep Dive. Today, we're going to be looking at the conflict in the Middle East. We've got reports straight from the front lines in Gaza and Lebanon. We'll be talking about some controversial military tactics. And plus, we're also going to look at the international efforts to kind of de-escalate things, and even how all of this is shaping the U.S. presidential election.
You know, it's fascinating how intertwined all these stories are. We're going to try to help you understand not just what's happening, but why it matters, both for the people who are directly affected and also for the bigger global picture.
Okay, so paint a picture for me. Just how bad are things right now on the ground in Gaza and Lebanon?
Well, the Israel-Hamas war is now in its second year, and the numbers are just devastating. The death toll in Gaza has climbed to over 40,000, with more than 96,000 injured. And it's not just contained to Gaza either. The conflict has spilled over into Lebanon, with Hezbollah launching rocket attacks on Israel, and then Israel responding with airstrikes in both Gaza and Lebanon.
It's hard to even grasp the scale of that. And I imagine it's not just the sheer number of casualties, but also the conditions that people are facing every day.
Right. It's a humanitarian catastrophe unfolding. We have a quote here from Dr. Mohammed Saleh, who's the acting director of Al-Auda Hospital in northern Gaza. He says, "We smell death everywhere. Ambulances can't even reach the injured because of constant attacks. They're running out of staff, medical supplies, food, fuel, you name it." He described having to share scraps of bread with patients just to keep them alive.
That's heartbreaking. It sounds like northern Gaza is essentially cut off from the world.
That's exactly right. Hospitals are struggling to function, basic supplies are dwindling, and the UN is warning that this conflict could set Gaza's development back by almost 70 years. That's almost an entire lifetime of progress just wiped out.
It's hard to even fathom what that means for the people living there, what that will do to the future of the region.
Think about what Dr. Saleh said about smelling death everywhere. Now imagine that reality, coupled with the fact that the infrastructure, the economy, the education system, all the building blocks of a society have been decimated. We're talking about a lost generation, a future riddled with hardship.
And it seems like the conflict is escalating. We've got a CNN investigation revealing that Israeli soldiers are using Palestinian civilians as human shields in Gaza. They call it the mosquito protocol. And it's raising some serious ethical and legal questions.
This tactic, if confirmed, is deeply disturbing. Using civilians for military purposes is strictly prohibited under international law, specifically the Geneva Conventions.
But haven't tactics like this been used before? I vaguely remember something similar happening in previous conflicts.
Yeah, the use of human shields, unfortunately, is not new, but that doesn't make it any horrific or illegal. What's particularly alarming about the mosquito protocol, as it's being called, is that it appears to be a systematic tactic, not just isolated incidents. And the potential for widespread abuse and human rights violations is enormous.
So, given the escalating violence and these controversial tactics, what's the international community doing to try and de-escalate the situation?
Well, the U.S. is definitely taking a lead role. Secretary of State Antony Blinken has been shuttling between Qatar and Saudi Arabia, trying to broker a ceasefire and get hostages released.
It sounds like an incredibly difficult job, especially with reports surfacing that some of America's Arab allies are starting to doubt the U.S.'s ability to bring stability to the region.
It's a delicate balancing act. Meanwhile, France is stepping up as well. They're hosting a conference in Paris aimed at raising humanitarian aid for Lebanon and also pushing for a ceasefire.
What's interesting to me is that this conflict isn't just playing out on the battlefields. It's become a major talking point in the U.S. presidential election.
Absolutely. And it's adding fuel to an already heated political climate. Republican candidate Donald Trump has made some pretty controversial statements, even referencing Hitler and his generals when discussing the kind of loyalty he expects.
Wow, that's certainly going to raise eyebrows. I mean, how can you even go there?
Well, his words have drawn sharp criticism, particularly from Vice President Kamala Harris, who's been very vocal about the dangers of a potential second Trump term. She called his remarks deeply troubling and incredibly dangerous, emphasizing the need for a leader who understands the gravity of invoking a figure like Hitler.
It's a stark reminder of how divided the country is, how this conflict is being used as a political weapon. But it's not like Trump is facing criticism from all sides. There are reports of him receiving support from figures like Representative Thomas Massie and Governor Chris Sununu, even after these remarks.
It's a fascinating, albeit unsettling dynamic. You see, the conflict in the Middle East isn't just shaping events overseas. It's become a battleground for American votes, a focal point for domestic political divisions.
It's a sobering thought. And it makes you wonder how much of what we're seeing in the U.S. election is driven by genuine concern for the people caught in this conflict and how much is political maneuvering.
It's a complex question, and there are likely a range of motivations at play. But what's clear is that the situation in the Middle East has become deeply intertwined with American politics. And the implications of that entanglement are far-reaching.
Absolutely. And speaking of entanglement, there's this whole story with Nicole Shanahan, RFK Jr.'s former running mate, who is now a Trump supporter.
Ah, yes. She's recently been in the news for attempting to suppress a news story about herself with, get this, a bribe. Apparently, she offered a Washington Post reporter $500,000 to kill the story.
$500,000 to make a story disappear. That's either desperation or a stunning display of arrogance.
It certainly raises questions about her motivations and judgment, but it also speaks to the influence of money in politics, how individuals with wealth can try to manipulate the media narrative.
And speaking of money and influence, what about this new pro-Trump super peak that's popped up? The one with funding sources so opaque, it raises all sorts of red flags about transparency and potential influence.
Now, for those not familiar with U.S. political jargon, a super PAC is basically a political action committee that can raise unlimited sums of money from corporations, unions, and individuals. They're not allowed to directly coordinate with the candidate's campaign, but they can spend freely to support or oppose candidates. And when you have a super PAC with funding sources that are shrouded in secrecy, it raises concerns about who's pulling the strings and what their agenda might be.
It's like a shadow game playing out behind the scenes, with potential consequences for the integrity of the election itself. And then we have Trump consulting with this lawyer, Kurt Olson, who is deeply involved in efforts to overturn the 2020 election. Now he's advising Trump on preserving voting machine data in key states.
That connection is particularly troubling. Olson was a key figure in the legal challenges to the 2020 election. Challenges that were ultimately unsuccessful, but sowed significant distrust in the democratic process.
So you've got this conflict raging in the Middle East with devastating consequences, a U.S. election heating up with candidates using the conflict to their advantage, and these behind-the-scenes machinations that feel like something out of a political thriller.
It's a lot to unpack, but it's crucial that we don't lose sight of the human cost of this conflict. We've been discussing political implications, legal controversies, financial maneuvering, but at the heart of it all are real people whose lives have been shattered.
You're absolutely right. And it's easy to get caught up in the bigger picture, the geopolitical strategies, the political posturing. But it's vital to remember that in Gaza and Lebanon, families are being torn apart. Children are growing up surrounded by violence and fear. And the basic necessities of life are scarce.
The UN report we mentioned earlier, the one that predicts the conflict could set Gaza's development back by nearly 70 years, really highlights the long-term impact this is having.
It's like the region's being plunged into a dark age. Not just because of the physical destruction, but because the loss of opportunity, the disruption of education, the erosion of hope.
Imagine being a child in Gaza right now. You're living with the constant threat of bombardment. Your school has likely been damaged or destroyed. You might not have enough food or clean water, and the future looks bleak.
And that's why the efforts of organizations like the Red Cross and Doctors Without Borders are so crucial. They're working tirelessly on the ground, providing medical care, distributing essential supplies, offering a glimmer of hope in what can feel like an utterly hopeless situation.
They're truly doing heroic work. And their efforts, along with the aid pledges from countries like France, are a testament to the compassion and solidarity that still exists in the world. But the reality is that the humanitarian need is immense, and the complexities of the conflict make it extremely difficult to get aid to those who need it most.
It feels overwhelming, so much suffering, so much political maneuvering, so much at stake. What can we as individuals even do to make a difference?
That's a question we'll explore further when we come back. It can feel like we're powerless in the face of such a massive, complex situation, but there are ways to engage, to make our voices heard, to support those who are suffering.
So we've been talking about the conflict in the Middle East, the devastating impact it's having on the people there, and how it's become entangled with the upcoming U.S. election. It's easy to feel overwhelmed, even paralyzed by the complexity and scale of it all. What can any of us really do to make a difference?
I understand that feeling. You know, it's easy to feel like a drop in the ocean when faced with such immense suffering and these seemingly intractable political problems. But here's the thing. Every ocean is made up of drops. And our actions, no matter how small they may seem, can contribute to a larger wave of change.
Okay, so where do we start? What are some tangible things people can do to support those affected by the conflict?
Well, the first and perhaps most important step is to stay informed. We've done a bit of a deep dive today, but this is a conflict that requires ongoing attention and engagement. Keep seeking out diverse perspectives, read beyond the headlines, and challenge your own assumptions.
So it's not just about knowing the basic facts. It's about understanding the nuances, the historical context, the different perspectives on the conflict.
Exactly. The more informed we are, the better equipped we are to make a difference. And once you have a deeper understanding, there are a number of ways to get involved. There are countless organizations doing incredible work on the ground, providing humanitarian aid, supporting refugees, and advocating for human rights.
So donating to reputable charities like Doctors Without Borders or the Red Cross is a good place to start.
Absolutely. Even a small donation can go a long way in providing essential resources like food, water, shelter, and medical care. But beyond financial support, there are other ways to contribute. You can volunteer your time, raise awareness on social media, or contact your elected officials to express your concerns and advocate for policies that promote peace and justice.
It's about using our voices, however big or small, to amplify the voices of those who are often silenced.
Precisely. And don't underestimate the power of simply engaging in thoughtful conversations with friends, family, and colleagues. Challenge misconceptions, promote empathy, and foster dialogue. Sometimes changing hearts and minds starts with a simple conversation.
It seems like there's a common thread here, whether it's donating to a charity, volunteering our time, or even just having a conversation. It's about taking action, however small, instead of getting bogged down by feelings of powerlessness.
You've hit the nail on the head. And remember, peace building is a long game. It requires persistence, patience, and a belief that a better future is possible even amidst the chaos and despair.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Middle East conflict, what's the one key takeaway you hope our listener will remember?
It's this. Knowledge is power, but only if we use it wisely. Let's commit to staying informed, engaging thoughtfully, and taking action to support those affected by this conflict. The road to peace may be long and winding, but it begins with each of us.
Well said. This deep dive may be over, but the conversation certainly isn't. We encourage you to keep exploring these issues, questioning assumptions, and seeking out diverse perspectives. Remember, even amidst the chaos, there is always hope, and there's always something we can do to make a difference. Thanks for joining us.